I definitely didn't understand probably until I was really married, where you're like, I get how it does actually increase your just overall well-being, lowers your cortisol levels. When I'm stressed, go to my wife, she chills me out. There's just so many benefits that come from it. And so I love this one. This is a fascinating one. All right, Dr. Gary, today we're going to be talking about how to get an edge in your life. Because one thing that we have found over the past decade here at Love Strategies is that our clients are incredibly successful, right? And it can be really hard as a successful person to just juggle all of life's demands. You got your family, you got your career, you got, love life, of course, you got your own personal love for yourself, right? You got to take care of yourself. And that's a lot. There's a lot going on. And of course, everyone wants to have it all. But the question is, how do you prioritize it? And if there's anything that I have noticed with successful people, it's that they tend to put all of their energy towards their career. And anything that gets in the way of that, they deprioritize. And so their love life tends to take a little bit of a backseat. So today, we're going to be breaking some of these beliefs for those super successful career women out there to talk about priorities in their love life. It's all about getting that, what are you calling it, Gary? Relationship edge?
The relationship edge. What's so ironic about this is, what do people love more than a life hack, right? Or a career hack, or some way to get ahead, some advantage. And there's this really, really big one that gets totally overlooked, and it's your relationship partner. As we say all the time, your relationship partner, your choice of that person, is the one decision you make on your own that impacts every single other area of your life, everything. And so that's a lot of what we're talking about today.
Yeah, and I can say that I look back at my life, if you look at just my career success with Love Strategies and you look at the growth, there was a certain period of time where it was pretty flatlined about 12, 13 years ago. It was just kind of the same thing every year. I was kind of doing my own thing. And then it's like, boom, met Jessica. And then it's like skyrocket. And I'm not saying she's responsible for all of it, but I would give her a huge amount of responsibility. I would give her a lot of credit for it. But I think a lot of it also comes down to the fact that now that I wasn't focusing on my dating life so much, I was now able to once again focus on my career. And I think that that's something that people look at it the opposite way. And that's, I think, a lot of what we're going to be reprogramming here.
Yeah, because, when you look at it, and it's something we talk to our clients about a lot, is relationship problems are life problems. But it goes the other way too. Life problems are relationship problems as well. And so the wrong approach that I think a lot of people take is, I'm going to get my life in order. I'm going to focus on my career, life, get all that stuff straight. And then relationships become an afterthought. And you make it an afterthought for too long, and it becomes really hard to pursue it in the way that you want to. And the problem is, it's actually all backwards, because focusing on your relationship really will help your life. You want to be successful in life, be successful in your relationship. As you just kind of alluded to with your situation with Jess, you get Jess gets in place, life kind of falls into place after that.
Definitely. And I think it's such a tricky situation because it's like the chicken or the egg. Like, which one do you start with? Because with everything that we teach, we do say, yes, you need to focus on yourself first, be relationship ready. But I think what we teach here at Love Strategies is you need to get to a minimum basis point of being relationship ready and then start dating and get out there. It's not like you need to reach this perfect enlightenment period where everything in your life is perfect except relationships, because I think a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is that the relationship, the right partner in your life, is what actually allows you to continue to grow to the next heights. It's very, very challenging, honestly, to get to the next level. Like any great, super great, successful person in life has an incredible partner who is supporting them. It's very rare to have someone who is achieving incredible health, incredible career success, has great relationships socially, who doesn't also have a great partner. And I think that, I want to just say, for those who are currently struggling in this area, maybe you're going through divorce or you're feeling single, that's okay. We're going to give you a huge ray of hope, but we're really going to be helping you prioritize your focus on what matters.
I like what you just said there about being ready, because there's a certain aspect to life where, you really do want to be a ready, aim, fire kind of person and not a ready, ready, aim, 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 right?
Aim.
Like at some point, you do have to like you have to go for that thing, and really, when it comes to going for that thing of relationships, we all want to be happy. Do you know who Naval Ravikant is?
I don't. I haven't heard of him.
He's this. I'm trying to think. I heard about him through a podcast, but he's basically like a modern day philosopher. A fantastic book. He's got an equation for happiness, and that equation is happiness equals health plus wealth plus good relationships. And the great thing is, it prioritizes happiness. Like that is actually what life is all about. It's all about being happy, and then the combination of health, wealth, and relationships is how we arrive at happiness. Now, the crazy thing, and the thing that made me put this in this podcast is how much time people spend a lot of time focusing on their health. They spend a lot of time investing in their wealth. And yet relationships are an equal part of this equation that we just kind of make an afterthought. Health first, then wealth, and then relationships. It's like, we'll kind of like, we'll invest in diet and exercise, self-care, we'll invest in our investment portfolio literally. But then when it comes to relationships, it's like, that'll just kind of take care of itself. And it's such a huge mistake.
I mean, Gary, people spend hundreds of thousands of dollars going to undergraduate college, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, and they may not have access to one class that teaches them anything about love and relationships, which is why I'm so drawn to what you do as a professor. Like, I love that you are kind of breaking that mold a little bit and really leading the way and teaching that in undergrad. But that is just mind-boggling because everyone knows that relationships are important, but maybe as a society, we haven't emphasized how foundational it is to actually your career success. And it really is a step one, get your love life together, find the right partner. And then step two, your career really starts to blossom. So it's just wild to me.
It's wild to me too, because not only does research show that we all have a fundamental need to belong, but if you really just think about it, about your life on a philosophical level, there's no version of your life, none, where love and relationships with other people isn't a priority. It's so fundamental to everything we do as humans, love and relationships. And yet it's this afterthought. And what we're talking about today on the podcast is how this is a big mistake that leaves you vulnerable. It's neglect at its worst. It's willful complacency at best. And the key here is you can't live well unless you're loving well. Your relationship health is tied to your mental health and your physical health, and your mental health and your physical health relate back to your relationship health. It's this one big cycle, everything relating to each other. And whenever I possibly can, I like to bring things back to Philadelphia, where I was born, raised. And so we talked about this before we came on the podcast. Adam has no idea who this person is, but Jason
Thanks,
Kelsey.
Gary, for telling the world. Appreciate it. That was private. That was said in private, but I appreciate it.
You're outed, pal. Jason Kelsey, super famous football player for the Philadelphia Eagles, brother to Travis Kelsey, who is somehow related to Taylor Swift, apparently. But like Jason Kelsey, Hall of Fame football player, in his retirement speech, he said, and I quote, "I think it's no coincidence I have enjoyed my best years of my career with Kylie by my side," his wife, right? Such an important, like, he's a football player. Like, how, but having your relationship in place sets everything else up for success.
Well, again, think about it as a single guy, as a football player. Oh my God, is your life going to be absolute chaos, right? You're going to be going out on the weekends. You're going to be meeting lots of women. You're going to have all of this like constant emotional drain that is not being put towards your work. And it's actually interesting you mentioned this because I went golfing this past weekend with a relatively new friend and another friend of mine. But his name's Jack, and he is like, has been perpetually single. He's a younger guy. I think he's like late 20s. But he's 6'3", handsome, really top of his game, like consultant, really well off. And he was just kind of a man whore, if I'm being honest with you. He was just dating a lot. He was getting out there a lot. And that's fine. I mean, he's in his 20s and, he was never like bad about it. He was never, as far as I'm aware, I don't know him very well, but he found love. He found love hard. Like since the last time I saw him, it's only been 2 months, but he's like, dude, everything has changed for me. It's wild. Like, I love my work now. This is unprompted, by the way. It's like, I love work now. I feel like now I have a purpose because now I'm investing so much in my work to build a life with this woman. And he just kept going on and on. Now, in my love coaching brain, I want to be like, hey, dude, slow it down a little bit. Like, you've just met this girl. But I let the romantic moment happen. And I think the point of all this is, though, once again, this goes for both men and women, where we do expel so much energy into dating. And when we don't have that anymore, that like we don't have to worry about dating, then suddenly our relationships can thrive. Now, with that said, a side point, people would be like, well, I don't want to have to expel that energy dating. You got to look at the energy. We've talked a lot about relationships and the end result, but we haven't talked much about how you get there, which is going on bad dates, which is going to the social event you don't feel like going to. It's going on that blind date that your friends set you up with. You don't know much about this guy and he's not really that cute, but I don't know. And it's like, oh, I could be working on that project right now that I have due next week. Instead, I got to put on my makeup and go actually make it happen. And that's an investment. If you can think of it as like legitimately, and I don't know if we're going to get there in this podcast, I might be like getting ahead of us in the pod, but like, that really is an investment in your future. Every single bad date is just one more step closer to finding that relationship and not having to think about it anymore so that you can then really thrive in your career.
Yeah, I mean, there's a certain bit of it where it's like runners will say something like, not every day is going to be your best run, but then there's just a certain aspect of just like miles logged. Like you just have to put in the work sometimes. And, sometimes things are a little bit, but I think something you said on a previous podcast that I think is really important to underline here is that overall, sometimes people do worry about the effort of dating, but if you look at the entire trajectory of your life and how much of an impact the person you're dating is going to have on your future relationship, the time you spend dating and effort, which seems like a lot of effort now, over the course of your lifetime, it is nothing. And yet it is so critically important to get this one thing right.
Yeah, it's so true. There's no one in your life that you spend more time with than your partner. You really do become the average of the person that you marry. It is pretty wild. You think the same way that they do, slowly but surely. You gain the same habits that they have, good or bad. You do the same things that they do for fun, because naturally you're going to want to do some things together. You're going to have the same social life as them. You're going to, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And when you choose it incorrectly, it is going to impact your career. We're basically trying to convince everyone listening who hasn't been prioritizing this, they've been prioritizing their career, to take a step back and focus on their love life, because we're trying to appeal to that part of your brain of wanting to be successful in your career. By focusing on this first, you're going to excel at your career. So here are 8 ways that a better romantic relationship is really a strategic advantage in life and your career. Number 1 is that you live longer. Talk about a time saver, right, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, who doesn't want to live longer, right? And so the great thing about all these 8 ways is there's research to back up every single one. And we won't like bore you to tears with all the details of all these studies, but essentially the one study I found about this shows that by having a high quality relationship, you have 50% lower mortality. So 50% lower mortality is a fancy way of saying 50% less chance of dying, right? And that's completely due to the quality of social relationships. And that held over people of different ages, health status, sex, all that kind of stuff. Having a good relationship keeps you living longer. You have a reason, you have someone to share that life with. So important.
Definitely. I got nothing else to add on this. If you want to live longer, focus on your dating life. And for those who are, once again, the majority of our audience, they're single. And that's for a reason. We talk about how to get out there and find love. We're using this as something that can be inspirational for you to kind of get your beautiful behind off of the couch and go take the action to go find that relationship rather than deprioritizing it, which is what the majority of people do.
Yeah.
The
So
second, oh, what were you gonna say,
I was
Gary?
just going to say, I think it's good that you just said that because I think this is something that everybody listening to this podcast, everything we're about to say that we've already said, you probably intuitively know. You're like, yes, I know this. But take this as a sign from the universe to make this a priority, to actually, like Adam, just to get your beautiful butt off the couch and go out there and prioritize dating relationships because it really is this important.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the second reason why this is a strategic advantage is that it just boosts our overall well-being. And there's an interesting study from Harvard Study of Adult Development, and I've read all about the study. I think I've read Naval's book, by the way. And this goes back to the 1930s, and one of the longest studies that have ever been conducted on adult life. And basically found that of all the things that we can do in our life that result in just general well-being, and that's defined by many different things, the quality of our relationship significantly influences our well-being and our happiness throughout our lives. I mean, the quality of our relationships is a key factor in leading that healthy, fulfilling life, highlighting the importance of social connections for overall well-being. We are social creatures, and we are designed for pair bonding. We are. And I understand this. Like, it's something that I definitely didn't understand probably until I was really married, where you're like, I get how it does actually increase your just overall well-being, lowers your cortisol levels. When I'm stressed, go to my wife, she chills me out. There's just so many benefits that come from it. And so I love this one. This is a fascinating one.
Yeah, and you talk about another major benefit very much related is better relationships help you have better mental health. And so what I found super interesting in digging into the research on this one is there is a little bit of, like you said before, a chicken and egg kind of thing is like, which comes first? Is it that you have better mental health and that helps you find relationships? Or do better relationships help you have better mental health? And so researchers looking into this basically tried to answer that exact question. And what they said, quote, the causal arrow flows more strongly from relationships to mental health than vice versa, which is kind of nerdy speak for just saying relationships matter more, right? Like, so better to have a good relationship that's going to positively influence your mental health. It's not as much about mental health influencing your relationships. Though that matters, it's just not as profoundly important as the impact. You're in good relationships, you're going to have better mental health. And specifically, you're going to have better mental health in the sense of less depression, less anxiety, less stress, less worrying, less sadness, more sense of purpose. And so mental health issues are associated with poor relationships.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing that can trigger someone who already has bad mental health than a breakup, right? A devastating breakup, divorce, even someone who has already pretty strong mental health. They're healthy
Mhm.
in that department. It can absolutely destroy us. And so finding the right person, right relationships, is so important.
Yeah. I mean, when you have relationship distress, you're going to experience a wide variety of mental health issues. And the research shows everything from anxiety disorders to phobias, bipolar, PTSD, eating disorders, alcohol, substance abuse. It runs the gamut of mental health issues. It's just really speaks to the fundamental importance of getting your relationships right.
Let's move to the next one, which is better physical health. It is all about being in a healthy relationship. It improves your cardiovascular health. I think a lot of this as well is in particular for men, but women as well. Like, I know for a fact that men are highly influenced if like with their health wise, if they're with a woman. I don't know why that's the case. If I had to bet, is the women keep the men in check a little bit. But this also goes for women, which is improved cardiovascular health, lower blood sugar, better immune system, experience less pain, helps you heal, even less obesity. And, again, what are the most important parts of life? Physical health, relationships, and financial. Those are the three components. So you kind of get a 2-for-1 here.
Yeah, and like you said, men do benefit more than women from marriage in general, which is just patently unfair, but it is just one of the truisms of life.
It's not
Men,
unfair for us.
no, but it is. Men tend to get most benefits, and women put in most of the work. But women do get benefits too, the ones that you mentioned in particular. And so the fifth advantage of the relationship edge is career success. And so, we were talking before about college courses and the expense of college and this kind of thing. And so Northeastern University in Boston, I believe,
Ooh,
is
yes, it is.
what, so they have, I came across this article, and what this article was explaining, which they thought was kind of like weird and interesting, which I'm reading this like, but of course. Essentially, this article was like business, finance, engineering, computer science students are all being forced to take a course that isn't on the standard curriculum. And the course that they were talking about was sex and relationships. And
Oh,
yeah,
no,
like finance
no.
people would need a course on relation. Like why? They're going to be so rich. Why would they need that? Turns out relationships help pretty much darn near everything, including your career. Interesting, another article I found about this. This was in Harvard Business Reviews. A guy did a bunch of interviews, like 160 interviews. And what they found was, again and again, that flourishing in your career depends as much on your relationships, both in and out of work, as it does on the job itself. And so your relationship really is important for your career. If you have lower marital satisfaction, research shows you're more likely to have problems at work, right?
Yeah.
It spills over. Politicians who felt closer to their relationship partner were more successful in their political careers. And it's not related to how long they are together. It's just it's not how long you've been together. It's whether you have a quality relationship.
So now I'm going to speak to all those super career-oriented women. I myself have always been a pretty career-oriented guy. So I understand where you're coming from, where you're like, I'm focused on this one thing where I really want to be successful and I want to earn an income and I want to make an impact in my life. That's wonderful. And I've also experienced when I'm like, well, dating kind of takes me away from that because it is a distraction. There's a lot going on with dating. You got to, again, go on the apps, you got to message people, you got to deal with, in your cases, like ropers and guys who are, the players, the emotionally unavailable guys. And yes, it is draining. But every time that you go on a date or every time that you respond to a guy on online dating apps, I want you to think about it as making an investment in your career. It really is. If you have to think of it that way, think of it that way. It's putting a penny in the piggy bank, just like drop it every time, because before you know it, if you continue taking those steps, you might have to deprioritize what's going on at work for a year. That's okay. You're going to be okay. I promise you are going to bounce back. But by making this investment now, going on those dates, working the process, getting coaching from either us at Love Strategies or at any coach, whatever it is, getting the help, getting the education, doing it right, that is all an investment that does pay massive dividends in the future. I know I've said that about 4 times in this podcast, but I cannot say it enough. So if we have to reprogram our mind, thinking about it like, I'm doing this because this is an investment in my future, great. Because there are going to be those moments on a Thursday night when you have a Friday morning meeting at 8 a.m. where you have to present and you're thinking to yourself, do I really want to go on this meetup with this guy? It's at 8 p.m. I got to get all done up. Might have to stay out a little bit later. Do it. It's worth it. Invest the time now because it will lead to even a higher career success in the future.
Yeah. And not for nothing, but there is very direct ROI. There's a return on your investment because research also shows, you earn more money when you're in high quality relationships. When your relationship life is going well, the research shows people who have better relationships actually take home more pay. Now, this is another one of those areas, I'm sorry to say that this helps men more. But if you're in a good relationship with a guy and he's earning more money, then you both benefit as well. I mean, it helps women too, directly. Like, so women earn more money as well. But there's something about being married that encourages greater productivity at work. And again, yes, that's a benefit. That's a marital advantage for men, even more than women, but there's an advantage for women as well. The next one is also an advantage for both men and women, which is people who are in better relationships make better leaders. And so this study looked at leadership and how subordinates rated their leaders. And what they found were leaders who had high quality relationships with low conflict were less abusive towards their subordinates, right? They're more
Mm,
understanding. They had more empathy. They're just a little bit more easygoing and easy to deal with, and less demanding and abusive. And like we've all had a mean boss on occasion, and it's like a little too demanding. And maybe they weren't having a great relationship life at home.
yeah. I had a boss once right out of college. This guy was like in his 30s and he was single. And oh man, like I don't think he was very good at it. This was before I was a coach or anything. I was in management consulting, but he would come in the next day and be just an absolute nightmare to deal with. You know that the date didn't go well. It was like, oh God, he didn't get some last night. We know this isn't going well. Don't let everyone hide. And that's kind of a silly example, but it is true even with employees. We employ a lot of staff here at Love Strategies. When something is off in someone's relationship life or dating life, it is a greater impact to their success in their career than really anything else. Like even over, like it's really difficult with employees because you can't really talk about that. I mean, luckily we're in like the dating business, so it naturally comes up a lot more than it probably would in other professional contexts. So we do talk about it with people if they want to. But honestly, it has a greater impact on people's career success and what they do than even their sleep. And you know how much I love my sleep, even more than what they eat. Like if something is off in an employee's love life, it just radiates into everything they do, into their body language, the way they interact with people, the way that they're showing up, their overall motivation, and it crushes them. So I can absolutely see why this would be the case.
Yeah, I was just kind of laughing about your story about having a boss like you described. I actually worked once for a couple. I worked at a video store back in the day, and this couple owned it. And we would all cringe when sometimes they would come in together and they'd be fighting through the front door. And then as soon as they came in, they would shut up because there was like they're at work, but they would just like glare at each other. And the guy would just like stomp around the store. And it just trickled down to everybody else. And then everyone's on pins and needles because like you don't want to say something because he's gonna take it out on you. If some video wasn't right or something was like you just knew it was gonna be trouble. Um, which I think all relates to the very last relationship edge here, which is the research shows that when you have a good relationship, you're less likely to experience burnout at work. And now, as you listening probably know, burnout's a big deal. There was a Deloitte work stress survey that basically found out of 1,000 employees, 83% experience burnout at some point. But a whole bunch of other research shows from lots of different sources essentially that work and relationships spill over into each other. And so if you have a bad relationship at home, it spills over into work and it makes work life a lot harder. If your relationship life is good, though, some of those negative things that can happen at work, the emotional exhaustion, work related burnout, all that kind of stuff, it's a buffer, right? Because essentially
Mm.
you can go home and it's like a sanctuary, your fortress of solitude with your partner, where like you don't have to worry about work anymore because you leave work at work, and then your relationship kind of like builds you back up and makes you able to go back and face work again the next day.
I just think that humans need a purpose. They need a mission. They need something that matters to them. And thinking back to my story about Jack, it really hit me because when he kept saying like I feel like I have a purpose now, that kind of hit me. It's interesting. And I think when you burn out, I think that comes from working so hard but not knowing why it is that you're working. And when you finally have a reason why you're working so hard, suddenly burnout's like kind of not a thing,
Yeah.
you know? So I don't know. I always think about, Allison, she's on the executive team. She always says like burnout's not a thing. That's like her statement. So I always think about her with that. Burnout is definitely a thing. I say that all the time. It's definitely a thing. And it is something that you need to be aware of. But when you have a purpose and you have a mission, suddenly it becomes far less likely that you feel that way.
Yeah. And there's also just something to be said. Sometimes if we're just working for ourselves, we've been taught our whole life, just don't be selfish, don't be selfish, don't be selfish. And you can kind of feel like a little guilty about working for, but as soon as you have somebody else with you and that you're working for them, you have this greater purpose, like you're saying, all of a sudden it's like, yeah, I will do that little bit of extra because it's not only just going to help me, it's going to help my wife, my partner, my husband, my family. And that gives you that greater purpose that you're talking about.
I wonder what the research shows about having children. And I know that having children is probably tricky because you obviously have to allocate a lot of time to them. But on the flip side, when you have children, suddenly now you have an even bigger purpose to work hard. So, I mean, that's kind of for a different podcast, but kind of leads me to think about that. You're the one and only dad on this podcast, but I'd be curious on your experience there.
I think it definitely gives you that greater sense of purpose. For me, it definitely focused me in terms of all of a sudden I had fewer hours for career. And so it forced me to be more efficient with my time. And now and I wasn't like this before I had a kid, but now that I have I am hyper focused about time. And I'm so much more productive than I was beforehand, even though I have less time to actually allocate to career related things.
Yeah, no, that's really smart, and I really look up to you for the way that you do that. I think that's awesome. That's cool. So, message to all of those beautiful single ladies listening to this who are thinking to themselves, "Well, I don't have a relationship. What do I do now?" Well, the reality is, better relationships don't just happen. Like having fulfilling relationships, it's not something that it just appears out of thin air. And yeah, I mean, can you just like find love randomly? Sometimes, yeah, it can happen sometimes through trial and error, but like error can take a lot of hurt. It can really hurt you throughout the process. But instead, I'd rather you think of finding this relationship, think of it the same way you thought about when you were building your career. It's like, I need to learn some new information. I need to have a strategy to make it happen. I need to have a community, a support group that will guide me along the way. And if you don't have that, then it's time to find that, whether it's with love strategies. And I want to make sure that you don't think that I'm doing this just to promote love strategies. If you find it with someone else, that's fine. If you find it with a therapist, that's fine. If you find it with a single girlfriend, that's great. I mean, obviously we do this for a living, so I'm trying not to plug it, but I want all of you to really honestly find your path forward and think of it the same way you thought about your career and making those stepping stones, taking the classes, learning new information, pushing yourself. If you got into, let's say you're a salesperson, how do you get into sales? You do 1,000 cold calls to prove yourself. Think of dating the same way. You go on 1,000, I mean, we're not going on 1,000 dates, but you go on 20 dates over the next couple months, you're going to be a lot closer than you were right now. And so if you think of it that way, you think about every single date as an investment in yourself, in your future, then it all starts to come into play for you.
And like we said at the top, we're not telling, there was probably nothing in this podcast that you heard and you're like, wow, that's surprising. We intuitively know how important relationships are, but what we don't do is prioritize what we know is important. And so, like I said earlier, take this as a sign from the universe. It's time, right? If not now, when? When are you actually going to put your relationship, dating, and love life first? Because why not now?